Alright, let's do this. Setting a timer. Damping oscillation. Oscillation in which amplitude decreases with time due to dissipation, called damp oscillation. Damp is the effort of resistive force which dissipate energy from a vibrating object. A pendulum oscillatory motion. A pendulum oscillatory motion will eventually stop due to air resistance, a type of damping force that decreases the amplitude of oscillation over time. Due to damping force, amplitude of oscillation decreases over time, one from an oscillation to next, and eventually stop oscillating. Okay, so now damping oscillation. Oscillation of amplitude. Oscillation in which amplitude decreases with time due to energy dissipation, called damping oscillation. Damping oscillation damping is the effect of resistive force which dissipate energy of a vibrating object. Oscillation in which amplitude decreases due to amplitude decreases decreases with time due to energy dissipation, called damping oscillation. Damping is the effort of oscillation. Damping is the effective effect of resistive force which dissipate energy from a vibrating object. Oscillation in which amplitude decreases with time due to energy or dissipation, called damping oscillation. Damping is the effort of dissipative force which dissipate energy from a vibrating object. A pendulum oscillation. Pendulum oscillation decreases motion eventually stop due to air resistance, a type of damping force that oscillates that decreases the amplitude of the oscillation over time. Over time, the amplitude due to damping force, the amplitude of oscillation decreases over time from one oscillation to next and eventually stops. Damping oscillation in which amplitude decreases over time. Oscillation in which amplitude decreases with time due to dissipation, called damped oscillation. Damping is the effort of oscillation. Damping is the effective resistive force which dissipate energy from vibrating object. Pendulum of oscillatory force. Pendulum of oscillatory motion pendulum of oscillatory motion pendulum oscillatory eventually stop due to a type of damping force that decreases amplitude of oscillation over time. Due to damping force, amplitude of oscillation decreases over time from one oscillation to the next and eventually stop oscillating. Example of damping force. Example of damping force include example of damping force can include frictionless force. Example of damping force can include frictionless force. The example of damping force can include frictionless support. Example example of damping force example of damping force can include friction. Example of damping force can include frictionless support between moving parts. Example of damping force can include example of damping force can include frictionless part. Example of damping force can include frictionless force between moving part, air resistance, or internal forces such as those in the springs that tends to dissipate by heat energy. Example of damping force can include frictionless support. Example of damping force can include frictional force between moving part, air resistance, and inertial force such as those in springs that tends to discuss energy as a heat. Example of damping force include example of damping force include frictional force between moving parts, air resistance, and inertial force such as those springs that tends to dissipate energy and heat. Example of dissipation. Example of damping force can include frictionless force. Example of damping force can Example of damping force can include example of damping force can include friction force between air resistance. Okay. Example of damping force can include frictional friction include example of damping force include frictional force between moving part, air resistance, and inertial force. Example of damping force can include frictionless support, frictionless force between moving part, air resistance, Example of damping force can include frictional force between moving part and air resistance or inertial force such as those springs and tends to dissipate energy as heat. Example of damping force include damping force can include frictional force and air resistance and air between moving part and air resistance. Moving part, air resistance, inertial force such as those in the springs that tends to dissipate dissipate energy as heat, dissipate energy as heat, dissipate energy as heat. Friction example of damping force can include example of damping force can include example of damping force include example of damping force can include example of damping force can include example example of damping damping force can include can include the example of damping force can include frictional force of moving part, air resistance, and internal force such as those in springing that tends to dissipate energy as heat, such as those in springs such as those in spring such as those in springs that tends to dissipate energy as heat. Example of damping force can include frictional force between moving part, air resistance, and initial internal force, such as those in spring that tends to dissipate energy as heat. Damping force can include frictionless force between moving part, air resistance, or inertial force, such as those in spring that tends to dissipate energy as heat. Damping force include example of damping force can include example of damping force can include frictionless force between moving part, air resistance, and internal force such as those in springs that tends to dissipate energy as heat. That tends to dissipate energy as heat. Example of damping force can include friction force between friction force between friction friction force between friction force between moving parts, air resistance between moving parts, air resistance, and internal force such as spring that tends to dissipate energy as heat. Dissipate energy as heat. A spring oscillation. Oscillation eventually comes to rest due to frictional force, and if amplitude of oscillation decrease under damping force, then they are damped oscillation. Springing oscillation. Springs oscillation eventually comes to rest. Due to frictional force, and it and if the amplitude of oscillation decrease under damping force, they are called damping oscillation. That's basic. A spring oscillation eventually comes to rest. A spring oscillation eventually comes to rest due to frictionless support. due to frictional support, frictional force, and if amplitude of oscillation decreases under damping force, they are called damped oscillation. What is it? If springs oscillation comes to eventually eventually comes to rest. Eventually comes to rest due to frictional force frictional force come to rest due to frictional force, if the amplitude of oscillation decreases due to under damping force, due to under damping damping force they are called damp oscillation. Damped oscillations. What is damping oscillation? Damping oscillation is in which amplitude decreases with time due to energy dissipation are called damping oscillation. Damp oscillation, damp oscillation. What's the second line? Damp oscillation, damp force. Continue. Skip the word damp. Damping oscillator. Damping oscillator. Think. Damp oscillator. Damping oscillator. Damp oscillator. Constant. Damp is effective. Damp is the effect of resistive force which dissipate energy from vibrating objects. Damping is the effective resistive force force. Damping is the effective resistive 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 force of a effect of resistive force which dissipate energy from vibrating object. Which dissipate energy from vibrating object, from a 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 vibrating object, disappear from a vibrating object, disappear from a vibrating object. Damping is a effect of resistive force which dissipate energy from a vibrating object. I pendulum oscillator motion eventually stop due to a type of amplitude of oscillation. A type of amplitude of oscillation. A type of amplitude oscillation. A type 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 of amplitude oscillation. A type of damping force. A type of damping force that a type of amplitude that decreases eventually. Damping for a type of damping force that decreases amplitude over time of oscillation over due to damping force of oscillation decreases due to amplitude of oscillation over time from one oscillation to next, and eventually stop oscillating. Example of damping force. Example can look at it. Example of EXAMP. Example of damping force can include frictional force. Frictional force. Damping force can include frictional force between moving parts, air resistance, and internal force such as those in spring dispute energy as heat. That tends to dispute heat. A spring oscillator eventually comes to rest due to friction force. If the amplitude of oscillation decreases due to under damping force, they are called damping oscillation. 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 As an oscillator vibrates, as oscillator vibrates. It perform work against force of friction. It perform work against force of as oscillator vibrates. 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 As an oscillator vibrates. It performs to work against friction of force. It performs works to against friction, force of 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 friction, which result in the gradually decreasing oscillator energy. The line tell us about as an oscillator vibrator. As an oscillator vibrator, it performs work against frictionless force. Then it eventually decreases, which results in general decrease of oscillator energy. ठीक है. As an oscillator vibrates. As the oscillator vibrates, it perform work again frictional force perform work against force of friction, FRIC, frictional, comma as an oscillator vibrates, it performs work against force of friction, comma आगे क्या आता है फ्रिक्शन, फोर्स ऑफ फ्रिक्शन, decreases, which results results are either GRAULLAL, gradually decreasing, DECREAS, decreasing of energy, oscillation energy. Yeah, that's the thing. Decreasing of oscillation, ENERGY energy, oscillation energy, oscillation energy. ENERGY, oscillation energy. Next, oscillation energy. Okay. A spring oscillator eventually comes to rest due to friction force and its amplitude of as an oscillation vibrator vibrates. It performs work against the friction force of friction, which results in gradual decrease of oscillation energy. The damping is said to be light. An oscillation vibrator, it performs work against frictional force, which result in gradual gradual decrease in oscillator energy. Oscillator energy. The damping is said to be light. Damping, damping is said to be light when the amplitude of oscillation decreases gradually with time. Damping is said to be light. Damping is said to be light. Okay. Damping is said to be light when amplitude of oscillation decreases gradually by time. Okay. Gradually decreases with time. When the amplitude decreases by time. When the amplitude decreases by time. When the amplitude okay, a damping is said to be light when the amplitude of oscillation decreases gradually gradually by time. Gradually by time. Whatever. Damping, light damping. What's the as an oscillation. Oscillator vibrates if it perform against the friction force, which result in gradual decrease by oscillator energy. The damping becomes light. Is said to be when the amplitude of oscillation decrease gradually with time. Okay. Damping is said to be light. Damping. Damping is said to be light. Said to be light if an amplitude amplitude if an amplitude A damping is said to light if an amplitude of oscillation decreases of oscillation decreases decreases gradually gradually with time light damping LIGH light damping DAMPING damping. Light damping gradually decreases. Light damping gradually decreases the energy and amplitude of vibration of object. By light damping gradually decreases. Light damping gradually decreases. Light 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 damping gradually decreases. Light damping gradually reduce है एक चीज़ है light damping gradually decreases the energy and amplitude of a vibrating object and an example of light damping is swinging in playground which gradually comes to rest when the oscillation is free displacement time graph ठीक है okay light damping gradually reduce the energy of amplitude light damping gradually reduce gradually reduce the energy light damping gradually reduce the energy light damping gradually reduce the light 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 damping 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 gradually decrease or reduce energy and amplitude of the vibration object an example of light damping is a swing in playground which gradually comes to rest when oscillates freely light damping gradually comes to rest light damping gradually gradually reduce reduce energy energy and amplitude amplitude of a vibration object of an amplitude of vibration vibrates object 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 an example of LIGHT light damping 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 is swing swing in playground ground that EVENTA L by eventually EVENTA eventually comes to rest due to oscillates it's freely freely displacement time graph of light damping. Okay, again, heavy damping. Heavy damping causes the oscillator gradually return to its equilibrium position without completing a single oscillation due to significant resistance. Heavy damping, HEVY, heavy damping, heavy damping, heavy damping, cause oscillator, 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 heavy damping, cause the oscillator gradually return to its equilibrium position without completing an oscillator due to significant resistivity. Heavy damping cause the oscillator to gradually return to equilibrium without single oscillation due to resistive force. कहने का ये light eventually the light damping, heavy damping is like gradually come to equilibrium position एक mean position without single oscillation due to significant resistive force, like proper hold कर देते हैं. Okay. Heavy damping cause heavy damping cause the oscillator to gradually decrease as the oscillator gradually decrease. Heavy damping caused the oscillator gradually decrease. Heavy heavy damper damping cause heavy damping cause oscillator to gradually come to equilibrium LIBRIUM equilibrium position gradually return या हम एक चीज़ return to equilibrium position without WIT is without complete 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 SINGLE complete single oscillation without single due to significant resistive significant resistive force. Heavy damping cause oscillation gradually heavy oscillation. Heavy oscillation cause the oscillator gradually come to equilibrium position gradually return to equilibrium without completing single oscillation due to significant resistive force. ये भी होगा. Oscillation of a mass attached to a spring attached to a spring that placed in a thick various liquid can be considered heavy damping. Okay. Durable damping returns the objective to the equilibrium position in a shortest time period. Oscillation of a mass attached to a string that displays thick oscillation of a mass attached oscillation of a mass attached oscillation of a mass attached with oscillation of a mass attached to a spring that oscillates that is placed in a thick various liquid oscillation of a mass attached with a string attached to a string oscillation of a mass attached to a string that is placed in a thick viscous liquid can be considered as heavy damping. Okay, pause. 10 minutes break. Round 2. Come on. Round 2. Oscillation in which amplitude decreases with time due to energy dissipation are called damping oscillation. Damping is effective. Damping is effective in resistive force which dissipate energy of oscillation vibrating object from a vibrating object. A pendulum pendulum oscillator motion eventually decreases. Eventually stop. With a type of damping force that decreases amplitude of decreases amplitude that decreases amplitude over time due to damping force. Amplitude of oscillation decreases over time from one oscillation to the next and eventually stops oscillating. ठीक है. Example of damping force can include frictional force between moving part, air resistance, and internal force such as those in spring tends to dissipate by energy as heat. A spring oscillation eventually comes to rest. A spring oscillation eventually comes to rest due to amplitude due to friction force and the amplitude of oscillation. If amplitude of oscillation decreases due to damping force, then they are called damping oscillation. Okay, next line. As an oscillator vibrates if it performs. As an oscillator vibrates. Okay, मन थिंक क्लियर हो गया. As the oscillator vibrates, it performs work against the frictional force, which result in gradual decrease with oscillate energy. Light and damping force is said to be light, which the amplitude of oscillation decreases gradually with time. Light damping for gradually reduce friction, gradually reduce energy and amplitude of vibrating objects. An example of light damping is swing gradually decreasing, which gradually comes to rest due to oscillate freely. Heavy damping ग्राफ लिखा हुआ है, ठीक है. अब लाइट में heavy damping cause the oscillator to gradually return to equilibrium position without complete single oscillation due to significant resistive force. Significant resistive force. Oscillator mass attached to a spring that placed in a thick various oscillator of a mass attached oscillation of a mass is version of mass attached to a spring. String comes to that is placed. There is thick viscous liquid 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 can be considered as heavy oscillation. No. Critical damping oscillation of a mass attached to CRITIAS. Critical damping return to the object, returning the object to equilibrium position in short period of time. Position to be close the book, writing the Yeah, oscillation. Oscillation, which which co- which in which amplitude decreases with time. Decreases decreases with time due to amplitude due to energy energy dissipation go damping force RCES force damping force damping force full stop. Damping yeah, got it. Half damping. I heard someone near damping is effective effect of resistive force RESISTIV resistive force FRCE for which dissipate due to energy vibrates I don't know. A pendulum's motion eventually eventually comes to stop due to air resistance RES RESISTNCE a type of damping force damping force that comes when damping force type of damping force type of damping force which amplitude decreases CREA decreases over time due to over time full stop. The damping force oscillation comes and due to amplitude and due to amplitude of times amplitude decreases over time eventually zero. Decrease over time one by oscillation to the next and eventually eventually ended eventually stop to clear. Eventually stop to oscillate. Example. Minutes long. Example of damping force. Don't touch the book. Rules are simple. Example of damping force. Example of damping force. Example of damping force can include frictional force between frictional force between frictionless force between some parts, moving parts, air resistance, air resistance and I enter internal force and internal force, for example internal force such is such as oscillation tends to dissipate due to heat. नेक्स्ट क्या है? लाइट वेव से पहले एक और आता है ना, लाइट डैम्पिंग से पहले एक और डैम्पिंग आती है, क्या है? हैवी डैम्पिंग, क्रिटिकल डैम्पिंग, ऑस्किलेशन. I'm checking. As an oscillate vibrates. Okay, this is important. As an oscillator vibrate frictionless support घटाने के लिए. Work against yes, fuck. Vibrate, it perform work against frictional force by gradually result which result in gradual gradually decreasing gradually decreases result in gradual decrease in oscillator weight. Oscillator energy यहाँ तक काफ़ी आगे क्या है. It is said to be oscillator. Oscillation is said to be oscillator. Oscillator. It is said to be oscillation. It is said to be light damping. LIGHT, light damping, which amplitude amplitude oscillate its amplitude decreases. DECREAS decreases eventually decreases gradually with time. Gradually amplitude decreases gradually with time. Gradually as time passes. बस यहाँ से ये वाला इस्तेमाल करते हैं मैंने सर light damping damping. Light damping reduce reduce energy and amplitude and amplitude. Okay, I forgot. Light damping eventually reduces light damping gradually reduce energy and amplitude of a vibration object by vibration object. Example of light damping is swing in playground, playground, ground, gradually amplitude and coming to यहाँ डायग्राम बना दें डिस्प्ले टाइम coming to oscillate freely. Heavy damping, HEAVY, heavy damping, DAMPING, heavy damping, cause heavy damping, heavy damping cause heavy damping क्या cause let me check 3 times checking कर चुका हूँ. Heavy damping cause oscillator heavy damping cause oscillator cause heavy damping cause oscillator to gradually gradually return to equilibrium equilibrium position due to equilibrium position and EVE eventually stop oscillation due to resistive force एक और क्रैम्बिंग फोर्स कर ले. क्रैम्बिंग CRI क्रैम्बल क्या यार critical damping CRITI critical force critical damping cause oscillator to return to equilibrium position in short period. Done. Yeah. Put it 48 something. Yeah, there you. Taking a break because fuck this. 2 rounds, 3 rounds, I don't know. Second round finish. No more studying. Only for one question. Thank you. I guess I don't know. I'm gonna put in a video. That's it. Bye.